Well, I'm excited today to kick off season 3 of Diagnostic Guru. We're taking a little bit of a different direction where we're going to focus more on the finance behind the science in the healthcare, diagnostic, biotech, pharma industry. And our first guest is Michele Colucci, Esquire. She's actually the managing partner and CEO of a company called Digital Diagnostic Ventures. And I think this is poignant in having Michele talking to us today because she really bridges the world between VC and healthcare as a thought leader, a lawyer, an investor, and a serial entrepreneur and a philanthropist. And one of the interesting facts about how I met Michele is that she actually came to me through somebody else who we interviewed as a diagnostic guru, Barbara Zettner, on season 2. And then from us talking, learned that Michele is also a board of directors on a multitude of companies, but two companies know very well, Biosha, that I'm also an advisor on. But we interviewed my first episode ever, Diagnostic Guru. We had the CMO, Dora, on. And then last season, we had the CEO of Delphi Diagnostics, Susan Tucci, on, where you're also a board of directors. So I think it's poignant that this web that we're weaving, that you're here to kick off season 3. So welcome, Michele.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here, Leslie.
Well, I think it's really important as women that we always start out with what is our greatest success or accomplishments to date. So could you share with the audience, do you have a greatest accomplishment, whether it's personal or professional?
You know, um, I was a single parent when my children were very young. They were 1, 4, and 6 when I separated and divorced. And then when my oldest was 12 and a half, I got my daughter, who was 12 at the time when my best friend died. And I think that probably my biggest accomplishment is um, raising them as kind, thoughtful, humble, empathetic humans. And I think that's, probably the hardest thing I've ever done under a lot of um, sort of adverse circumstances. And so I feel that just the fact that they're good people, right? Good humans today, and I love being with them is really something that I feel has been a big accomplishment.
That's an incredible reward in the end that you still can feel that success in them as adults today. Do you find it hard, especially in your world where you're coming from, there's not a lot of kindness out there,
Yeah.
um, and how they're influenced, by social media or other children or influencers, in society, that it's hard to continue to keep that sort of upbringing, or do you feel that once you got them grounded, it was all like sailing from there?
I think the grounding is the critical piece. They say that that has, massive impact. Always reminding them of what it feels like on the other side, of whatever situation they're in, or always trying to get them to think about sort of the gut check of, does this feel right? Is this the right thing to do? I think has been in my estimation the best training I could give them, and I know that they use it now. So it's hard, once that's baked in, it's baked in or it's not. And you see people with various degrees of good or bad behavior, and I think a lot of it comes from, the early experiences. Um, and sometimes it's aligned and sometimes it's a reaction to, so it's not always exactly like that. Obviously, there's things that get in the middle of things, as we've seen recently with drugs and things that make people other than they are. But I believe that that early foundation gives them pause to think, and then their decisions are their decisions, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's amazing how you can see kids coming from the same
Yes.
family upbringing, but the epigenetics are different, right? They can be
Right.
two, like me and my brother, two
Right.
completely different
Yeah.
people. But I really love that you raise your children that way. It really sets with me. And every day when my kids leave for school, mine are little, I always tell them kindness with strength,
Yeah.
because I want them, it starts young with these kids. I mean,
It does.
challenges that
It does.
happen. So I want
Yeah.
them to feel confident in their decisions at the end of the day. So what a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. Like, all right, well, let's talk more about your line of business.
Sure.
Also being a strong woman and mother and CEO of your household, you're also CEO of a venture capital firm. What's it like when you sometimes I would think you're probably one of the only women in the room, or there's maybe very few in this very competitive space.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The women-run funds are less than 2% of funds out there. So if you think of walking in a room of 100 people, it's two women and the rest are guys. Um, you know, it, I don't think it bothers me in the sense that, I'm equally comfortable with man or woman. I'm talking work, it's work. I don't care where you come from, what you look like. You could be green. I don't care. I just want us to be aligned in the goal. So the lack of alignment is harder, right?
Mhm.
When there's sort of some of this, I want to win at all costs and at everyone else's expense, that kind of doesn't work as well. And so that's the harder part. But just being a female investor is actually gives you quite an edge because there's a lot of people out there who don't have access to that existing network. And I think that as women, we talk about the hunter and the gatherer, we gather from all over. So people come out and help, and we know people, and we have networks that are more expansive. We're more social or communicative in some ways. So I think as a result, our deal flow is really robust. Our team, our experts, our network is very supportive and much larger, I guess I'd say more quality driven because we're not just looking for, make the most on this at all costs, right? We play well in the sandbox and that other people want to work with you when you play well in the sandbox, and that's key.
There's so many statements there that each snippet I just want to kind of chew at a little bit further. I think the biggest one for me is the lack of alignment, regardless of who's in the room.
Mm.
Me myself, as an executive, had several instances of that where bringing people to an understanding, it's a unique, skill set to have, regardless of who's in the room. Because at the end of the day, if you can't align on something, then the company's not going to move. It's not going to go
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah. I think one of the key factors that people forget, and I remind them a lot of this, is that when you're on a board, your duty is a company, not your shareholders, not your investors. You have to do what's best for the company. And I think a lot of people forget that. And that really is, a guiding principle. It's the company's, shareholders, and common shareholders, and preferred shareholders, and all the shareholders that you're really there to serve. So what's in their best interest? It's not always what's in the best interest of your fund, perhaps,
Hmm.
um, because maybe a fund needs an early exit and they're pushing their companies to exit. That's not the right thing to do if it's not the right time for the company. On the other hand, sometimes the company wants to push for an exit, and it's not the right thing to do because really they should be adding more money in and moving forward. But maybe that CEO thinks, oh, they're not going to be the CEO at the next round, so they don't want to lose their equity or whatever the reasons are. So it's hard because, you want to support the company and you need to support the company, what's best for the company to do. And that often can be conflicting on the board, right?
Oh, absolutely. I've been there experiencing it. A lot of times I feel the science gets lost because it's always about what the investors want, the timelines that they want, and it's not feasible, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. And so it's challenging at times to meet those timelines, but also keep the quality that you talked about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
at the
It's
same
tough.
time.
It's tough, but, given the climate and the funding climate, investors can say, okay, if you can't do it, I'll go somewhere else. So it's like, you've got to figure out as an entrepreneur, like, how can I please my investor and get a good medium? How can I negotiate this out so that I get what I need and the support financially, and they give me what I need internally on the time to get my product to market in a responsible manner, right? I think that the minute you take money in, you have to abdicate some of the decision making or at least share it. And you have to be open to listening. And that's one of the really critical aspects of investing in founders. And I've learned a lot over the time that I've been investing is this founder open to thoughts or other ideas or input, and the right input, right? Because a lot of people want to give advice, but they might not know what they're talking about. But there's people who do know what they're talking about, and being able to discern the differences between those two, and being able to make sure that as an entrepreneur you're listening or you take those things seriously is important, is very important. Because if people put, this is as a fund, right? We're investing people's savings,
Yeah.
their retirement, their last, money they have. Like, this is not money that is fungible, right? It's like it's it's real dollars that people worked really hard for. And so we have to be good stewards of that as an investor. And if the founder isn't recognizing that connection, they just think, oh, it's a venture money, they have money. Like, no, the money comes from people, and those people, have children and want to send them to college or want to retire or whatever. So there's a strong fiduciary responsibility to make sure that when we make an investment, we look through all that. So we look through the contracts, we look through what the documents are like. And again, that will reflect sometimes, oh, this doesn't seem right. What's wrong with this, picture here? That gut reaction to some stuff is really what you have to rely on a lot of the time. But yeah, it's not always easy to get everybody on the same page, but it's absolutely critical. And that's why funds make so few investments because you see
Mhm.
so many and you boil the ocean and getting down to the really exciting companies are really doing something critical. Then the team has to be, it's a lot of things have to line up and
Yeah.
it's not easy. It's not easy.
No, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, in a perspective of putting a human element to the dollar amount, the dollar
Yeah,
sign, right? You forget at the end of the day where it's coming from. It is
that's
some
right.
hard
Yeah,
money where they want to help the company grow, right? And but also help their family grow as well on the
that's
other
right. Exactly. Yeah.
side.
Yeah. Nothing comes from nowhere, right? It all comes from
Yeah,
somewhere.
we seem to forget in a lot
Yeah.
of instances. Do you feel that there's a lot of roadblocks for women in becoming investors? And if so, how can we change that?
It's interesting because I am, very connected to the female investor community that exists. A lot of times they're brought in because the group's all guys and they need a woman or they feel like so a lot of these women get very frustrated because they are brilliant, they're like off the charts amazing to get into that spot, and then they're just kind of ignored or not included, so they get very frustrated, and I see that, and a lot of women I know just try to start their own funds, but again, that's hard because women generally are not investors. They're far more risk averse or they don't control the money in the family. So for me, it was especially hard as a single female investor. I'm not going to lunch or drinks it with my friends' married husbands, right? My married friends' husbands. It's a little awkward to create your investment in the investor LP community. So I don't see it as changing that much because I think whenever you have a situation where it doesn't matter if it's men or women, if it's a people that are in a position of power, nobody wants to give that up. And it's a really important area where if you do well, you could do very well. If you do okay, you're okay. If you do well, you won't do it again. But or sometimes in some cases you see funds they don't do well and they raise a big fund after that. You're like, how did that happen? A lot of that's relationships. A lot of that's long-term relationships with. And so I didn't come out of school with five friends and trust funds that could put money together and support me. So you have to do it the old-fashioned way, which is really ground up and it's hard. And women also, as I mentioned, with I raised single parent with kids, you have other obligations and duties. If in healthcare specifically, one of the things we talk about is if somebody gets sick, it's a parent, it's a child, it's a spouse. Women have to drop everything to take care of them. So it's a problem we really need to solve. But a lot of women don't feel like either they're in a position or comfortable with stepping up to invest and be part of that solution. So it's hard. It's hard all around.
No, it's it's interesting in a sense of like, yeah, that uncomfortableness, and not being the primary ones who are managing your internal, let's say, financial portfolio. I see that time and time again, but I also, and also, I am also the one that drops everything and takes my kids to the doctors, right? Also
Yeah,
while being on business calls, et cetera. So
sure.
it's a lot to manage, at the end of the day. But do you feel as, society is changing a little bit? Like, just bear with me here for a minute, but like, for instance, there's a lot of work and efforts out there, not just to get women more involved in areas like this, but also on boards. Like you said, it's usually they bring in a woman to fill their quota, right? And then the woman most likely may not have a voice or
Yeah.
autonomy. And
They may
that's,
not need a quota anymore either.
yeah, may not. Oh, yeah, thank you. No quotas exist anymore. Can't even say the word woman. Uh, but it's the same thing, boards also in these types of worlds where we need more women because we are the gatherers, right? We are multifactorial. We And so, do you feel that that's changing a little bit? Because I do feel also more women are like you, who are the leaders of their finances, are more have higher positions in executive roles, et cetera, and are able to invest. Do you think that pendulum is going to switch, at some point?
There
Or,
is a large amount of money that's being transferred to women over the next 10 years, trillions. And so I think, yes. I think the key for us has always been we like diversity of thought. That's what we want. I don't care if it's a woman or man, if you're old or young, whatever you are. If we have a test in breast cancer,
hmm
it's probably important to make sure the viewpoints represented are patients.
mm,
And so, if we have a test for lung cancer, like women and men and certain his populations get lung cancer, right? And so I just think the diversity of thought around the table makes the solution better. It's actually proven. There's studies. I did a talk on this at the CFA Society on the diversity of thought and how many basis points it increases
mm,
in terms of returns. So I feel like there's a need for this diversity of thought. I don't want to see all PhDs. I don't want to see all MBAs. I don't want to see, all of one type of a background on a board. And that is the same with gender and race and everything, right? I don't think you need one of everyone, but you need enough diversity of the different viewpoints that are impacting that particular product to make it well informed, right? Decisions on these things. Is it changing? Um, you know, Maybe. I think women, as the money transfers more to them, or women are more in charge, there is a curiosity
mm.
about investing. But I think that, like, I didn't grow up learning about what a venture fund was on the breakfast table. So when you don't know something, there's kind of
Yeah,
this fear of it. Or, like, when you first start learning a new technology like agentic AI or something, everyone's like, oh, until you start doing it, you're like, oh, now I get it. So it's always, and so I think trying new things, people who are interested in new things and open to new things, I think they're more likely to be like, yeah, why isn't my IRA working for me, right? Because you can invest
yeah,
with your IRA now. You can, why am I not putting this to work, and I have enough, in a responsible way, right? Alternative shouldn't be more than 5 or 10% max of your portfolio. But I do think it's like this level, this higher echelon that women are starting to understand. So I do talks for women on boards all the time, or women lawyers or people like that, just um, to expose them to what a venture fund is, just to explain the basics of how it functions. This is how you put your money in. This is the time. This is what you get back. This is what the deal is, so that it demystifies it. And I think the more we demystify it, the more
mm,
likely we are to get more women to jump in. I think the most important thing is that women need to be educated about it. We need
yeah.
to ask questions. We need to seek information. We need to join groups where other women are talking about this stuff. Because otherwise, what happens is you wake up one day and you're older and you're like, oh my gosh, why don't, I'm going to be stressed. I'm not going to have the money for this or that, because you really haven't thought about it early enough. So as the earlier we can train women and girls to understand what a balance sheet is, what a portfolio is, what investments are, how they work, just that basic information understanding makes that whole world more accessible to them, and makes the opportunity to work in the world more accessible to them, as well as investing in, right? It just, because it's demystified, it's like, oh, I understand that job, but that looks interesting, I want to do that. Whereas if you never, when I was growing up, we had in the school, it was the future farmers of America in this one rural area, right? And future homemakers of America. And if you were a girl, you couldn't be in the future farmers. You could only be in the
Uh,
future homemakers. So it's kind of funny. And I thought, why would I want to do that?
yeah,
But,
why don't I
but
want to be a farmer?
yeah, but well, yeah, I want to do the business stuff. I wanted the fun stuff, right? But
Yeah,
I think that, just siloing people into, like I said, women, oh, you do the charitable stuff and I'll do the financial investment stuff.
yeah,
It really undercuts their value and their judgment, because they're seeing things every day in the world too. They're making observations about what the world needs and solutions that it needs. And especially in this healthcare area, women make over 80% of healthcare decisions. So in our area, women's perspective is especially important, because those are the consumers that are,
yeah,
they're getting the test for their husband, they're getting it for their children, so I think that just being thoughtful about being about your future and your finances and learning and being open to learning is really the first step. And I think now that we're starting to see more of that opportunity and education available to women, these groups, there's many of them right now, that now that their awareness is peaking, then they're like, announcing an investor in this, and everyone looks at their LinkedIn. What's that? How are you an investor? How did that work? It's like
Yeah.
any kind of find an opportunity, right? An opportunity, somebody's, oh, there's opportunity for this. Oh, how did that happen? What's that opportunity? Can I take advantage of that? And so it just makes the entire world a little bit more knowledgeable and more curious. And then you get more investors that way, I think.
Yeah, what a beautiful closure on that because I do see that. I see a lot of women investor, women led, women only, or women investment companies are only investing in women led companies or solving for women health issues. And I myself try to get more involved in that. But I too come from a generation of I was raised to kind of be afraid of money.
Right.
And ne
We don't
never
talk
was
about it.
taught, right, like how to manage it. No one showed me how to do a checkbook or a savings account or the basics, right? Anything like that. I can't even. So now I'm like, maybe I'm going to teach my daughter how to do a balance sheet. Screw the checkbook. Nobody uses checkbooks.
Absolutely. Well, but look at your finances, look at where your
Yeah.
spending is, look at how you're spending, look at what you're putting away and what you're not putting away, right?
Yeah.
And plan for that rainy day and plan for that, your future, because you're going to want to buy a house one day, you're going to want to buy a car, you're going to, it's pretty empowering if you've made investments and, some you're going to learn, like, better to
Yeah.
learn on a small amount if you lose it than on a bigger amount later. So
Yes.
start small and get comfortable, get your feet wet, get the hang of it. After a year or two, you'll start to see how it really works, and then you'll start to make even better decisions.
Well, can you tell me what is your favorite part of your job and what's the part of your job that just absolutely sucks?
So the favorite part of my job is when I see something that we've invested and get an approval, get into the market and help people. There's no um, replacement for that, right? We had
Mm,
one company that got your approval for a UTI test in urine. So send it in and get it back in 48 hours. It's great. Amazing. 7,000 pathogen. Another one just got the first over-the-counter syphilis test that's going to prevent, blindness in children. So I feel like those things you kind of, wow, that's the impact I'm excited about making, and seeing the company succeed and raise money and get out there and have sales and, get cash flow going is very rewarding. Part I hate is the fundraising, to be honest, because it is so time consuming. And it's not that I mind the talks or meeting with people. I love that part. It's the time it takes to figure out who would consider this as an investment.
mm,
That takes forever. And so it's like a needle in a haystack because, as I said, women don't generally feel comfortable making investments in venture funds. The irony is sometimes they'll get comfortable first with making an investment in a single company,
mm,
which instead of a diversified portfolio, which is, it's because, oh, well, this is really great because it's going to save the world that's great. But if you're putting your risk hat on,
yeah.
that's more risk than it is if you're investing in a portfolio that has multiple companies and your risk is spread. So but it's emotional sometimes, right? So it's hard to get people excited about, the concept of money management. It's easy to get you excited about a company. This is a cure for cancer. Okay, great. I'm going to throw money at this, right? But and I'm going to make billions out of it. But I'm going to invest. I'm going to give my money to this person. They're going to invest it for me in companies. Not as exciting. We try hard to push through what the companies are so people know what they're investing in and get excited about them because we're excited about them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be making those investments. We don't make that many, right? So as a fund, we see 100 companies a month. So we're investing in very few. But we want the investors to understand where their money is going.
Yeah.
But that is definitely, I think it's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. I could be doing so many more impactful things with the investments and the companies and the people and all that. But it's probably if you can't do that, you won't have a fund. So it's the
Yeah.
necessary part. I don't think anyone in this business is excited about that.
Do you feel with today's economy is having a huge influence on your fundraising efforts? And if not, what are some of the other, if so, and if not, what are some of the other areas that it's affecting your company?
So
So,
yes, fundraising environment, especially climate last 2 years has been brutal.
mm,
Companies, we actually had to stop fundraising for our fund and just help our companies fundraise because they were really um, it was just a desert, right?
yeah,
So yeah, so that's been the environment's hard. The irony, of course, is, and this is what really educated investors and very successful investors tell you want to invest against the tide. So the fact of the matter is when this happens and there's no capital out there, the companies that come out that you would normally not be able to get, you can get into because they're obviously raising at lower values because they get no capital out there. So we are seeing some of the best deals we've ever seen in those down markets, right?
yeah,
That's the time when you want to be counter. You want to be counter to whatever's going on, right?
mhm,
And so people generally follow the herd mentality, as my friend Myron Scholl likes to talk about it. He's this is how the herd mentality, you want to be, against that. You want to go against that grain if you're trying to have outsized returns. And I think that's where the courage and conviction has to come in, because people tend to move in packs. So like, oh,
yeah,
if that person's in, then I'll go in. That person's in, I'll go in. Well, the reality is when you move in that way, you're not able to take advantage of the upside because it's already gone by the time gets to you, right? So if you watch the market and you're investing in a down market, what's the next place it goes when it's down? Up, right?
yeah,
So, but then people get excitement, and when the market's up, they're all investing at the top, and then those are the people that lose it. So I think you really have to time it right. You have to
mm,
be a little contrarian in your thought process. I know some really great investors like we want to invest in areas where nobody's investing right now. That's what we want to do, and that's true. That's where you make the biggest returns. That's what venture is, right?
yeah, exactly. Do you feel the landscape has changed a lot, specifically investing in these healthcare and diagnostic
Yeah.
companies in the last couple of years? And could you highlight a couple of those areas where you see a big change?
Yeah. So I think as I said, the funding is challenging. But what I'm seeing in the last few months is we had a couple of major acquisitions, from Exact Sciences to others,
Yes.
right? So we're
Add
seeing
it's
exits now.
interesting. It's an
There's like
interesting
three.
pairing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some really great ones. So we're seeing a lot
Yeah.
of that. So as a result, I think that people are starting to realize, because that was one of the complaints that people would say to me when I was fundraising, like, oh, well, I haven't seen exits in your space. I'm like, laughing because I'm like, again, the contrarian thinking. If there were a lot of exits, like going on, then that's not good. Then everything's exited. Why would you invest then? You want to invest when you either before there are or when they're just starting to, and that's a good time. So we're starting to see that that's changing. A lot of the strategics, which we work with a lot,
Mm,
investors, those are the big companies that acquire these companies. They have been they've a lot of them made a lot of cash, whether it's in COVID or other times, right? And
hmm.
so they have these war chests, and they're starting to invest them and buy companies. So it's a good time, and we've always invested with an eye to having at least one or two strategics on our cap tables, because we think it helps a lot with that thought process and having buyers at the ready when the time is right, who are interested. We don't give them special terms. There's maybe once or twice, and depending on what the special terms are, but because they always would like special terms, of course, consideration in some ways. But you have to be careful it doesn't hurt the chances of the company to sell to anyone else. So ideally you have two strategics on a board instead of one. But the reality is they have cash and they are acquiring, and it's a good time. So our companies hopefully are in a good position. I think we'll see some action next year or two. But I do see that changing. I also see this regulatory environment, going through a fairly large overhaul.
Yeah.
And on some way, if I look at the regulatory and I look at the funding, so on the funding side, non-dilutive funding, that's been brutal, right? All the grants are going away, all that kind of stuff. So those early stage proof of concept companies struggling. On the regulatory side, they're taking some of the regulatory barriers, I think, down. So it seems like it's getting, or at least they're getting more clarified. They're starting to use more technology to respond and so forth, I think, internally. So I think they're trying to level up the quality of the internal operation so they can handle more responses and get there faster and everything. So we have some very like forward-looking regulators like our Moldex head here is very forward looking, other people. So I think that they're really looking at these novel new biomarkers. You have the cancer fund that has the biomarker legislation that's been going on where they're, getting private payers to pay for some of the stuff. So I think that there's a movement that people are just fed up. I mean, this happened with with the killing of the healthcare CEO, insurance, right? Where they're like, well, this isn't covered. Why is it covered? This isn't being paid, whatever. So I think people are getting frustrated with that and they're taking matters into their own hands. So they are paying for their own tests.
Yeah.
Women especially have been so tired of being told that, hormones are not, a real condition. So they're like, I'm going to pay for, menopause stuff myself, or I'm going to pay for, so and HSAs are paying for it. Companies are now paying for things like fertility because, they're trying to make sure that the employees stick, to the company, the stickier environment for employee retention. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. New payers, the companies are starting to pay for things that the insurance won't pay for, or, the healthcare. And so I think that we're seeing more payers on the in the market. We're seeing a lessening of some of the regulatory restrictions, or at least a more clarifying
Yeah.
pathways for some of that. And an emphasis on some of these really large, chronic conditions that are costing our healthcare system, so much money with the potential of going bankrupt. So I feel like that's our focus on early diagnostics is and least invasive is in reaction to that, because if you can find things early, you can change the chances of survival from 20 to 80%. Like you can increase your survival chances in a lot of these things. So really being able to identify things as early as possible, being able to do the tests in your home in a non-invasive way, pee in a cup, send it in, spit in a test tube, whatever it is, and being able to have results faster and act faster is what people are now demanding and what is
Yeah.
going to save lives.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's ease of use, access, accessibility, clinical, utility with outcomes. How do I get treated? And
Affordability, all that. Mhm.
affordability, all of that. And the payers need to cover the cost of the test. Well, could you tell me, in your experience across, the VC, a lawyer, entrepreneur, et cetera, this is sort of the theme of this podcast, what your one good, one bad, and one ugly is?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a moment. So, the good would be, let me just think. What would my one good be? And in terms of good, you mean something good about the industry or my life or
Yeah, just something that you felt. And sometimes what I've found when I ask other DGs is sometimes the ugly turns into a good.
that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe
I
there's an
can,
instant that, or maybe overall, like right now, just you're changing healthcare. You're bringing on early
yeah.
diagnosis.
I think that the ugly part, I'll give my ugly part first.
That's usually easier, isn't it?
Yeah, it is easily. It's interesting, isn't that sad? But
Yeah,
because we remember those things, unfortunately.
yeah,
Um,
unfortunately.
I think that the ugly part that I see here is the fact that a lot of people put their interests before what's best for everyone. I think there's a lot of let me be whole and who cares about everybody else, right? In the venture fund business, there's people who really play well together, and then there's some that just don't. And they don't, it's like they don't care about the other investors, they don't care about the CEO, the C-suite, anything like that. It's just about how much can I, extract out of this. And on the one hand, you go, okay, well, they're doing that for their investors. On the other hand, it also makes them toxic in the sense that nobody wants to do deals with them.
Yeah,
And the good is that, like I said, I think that we're seeing people who really do who are brilliant, right?
yeah,
They're brilliant, and provided they also have that ethical underpinning that I talked about at the beginning, where you train that in your kids from early age,
yeah,
they can do great things for people, and they can make money and they can do great things and impact lives. And that's exciting when the really the good is in these entrepreneurs who are changing the world. That's the good. And then the bad. So I got the ugly, got the good. Now I'm at the bad. The bad is I'd say it's tough, obviously, like I mentioned, as a female investor and fund manager to raise capital because of the network is not there. So that's the bad part. It hasn't stopped me, but it definitely has slowed progress of what I thought would go faster because it takes longer to educate. It takes longer to connect to the right people. It
Mm.
takes longer to get your message out. Um, and and so it just takes longer. And the problem with taking longer is you lose opportunities. And also there's a perception, which is kind of weird in the industry. I never understood this, where that, well, if it's a fund, if you raise it fast, you're like hot. If you don't, you don't. It's like that really actually prejudices women because
Yeah.
it takes us longer to meet investors and to raise money. Like,
Mhm.
taking 3 years to raise a fund, perfectly acceptable to me. Oh, well, if you don't raise it in the 2 years right away, you're this and that. So I try not to listen to that. I try to just
Good for
ignore
you.
that because what that means is that those people who are investing in those funds are all followers. They're
Yeah.
not looking at a strategy out of conviction. They're not looking at it by saying, this is a great strategy. I want to be part of this, right? They're saying, oh, that person raised so much, so they must be good. And in fact, you see this in follow-on rounds of large funds
Yeah.
who have a name, but maybe their funds aren't doing well, but they're still raising $1 billion anyway. And you're like, so I think it's because of that energy of, oh, if you're, you know, with this, you're doing well. If you're here, and not people who are really bringing their independent analysis and evaluation to the opportunity that someone is presenting them. And again, that does prejudice women because women are the ones who are starting these new funds. They haven't often been through that usual course that large investors like to see, where you worked in another firm and you work with this and you've done these deals and then you've been successful, then you spin out your own firm. That's the traditional, I'm going to support you in a new fund model. The problem
Yeah.
is if women haven't been doing that, how are you going to support any spinouts that are women? There are not going to be many of them. So the,
Oh,
the idea here is women have to do things in a more entrepreneurial way. So we have to convince people through the quality of our thought leadership and our education of the vertical and our knowledge of the vertical and the opportunity we present and the market indicators and so forth. And then we have to kind of turn around and say, well, yes, we can do this. You can be convinced of all that, but they'll be like, well, who are you to do it?
yeah.
And you don't have the traditional pedigree, so you have to then explain that, right? So you're
More
constantly
more
like trying to
time.
justify your existence, and you're like, okay, so I get it, and I'm happy to do it. I don't mind doing it, but I just wish sometimes investors would be a little bit more, not so much focused on um, the traditional routes or the traditional ways of vetting, but really
Hmm.
look a little bit more non-traditional because that's the only way they're going to get into some of these new emerging funds that are doing fantastic. If you look at the performance of these emerging funds, they're outperforming, all the traditional funds. And it makes sense because you have a smaller amount of money, and you're more active, right? So you're doing all this stuff. If I'm a fund, I'm a billion, I got to put large chunks to work and drive those companies to success. And that's I think it's harder. I mean, I shouldn't say it's not harder. It's harder to make the level of returns you need to establish yourself. You can
Mm,
make 2x, 3x returns, that's okay, and that's what we'll be happy. But if we're trying to get, our 5x or whatever we're trying to get in some cases, it takes these alternative, venture
yeah.
funds that are usually early stage, a single early funds, first, second, third fund. And vetting those and figuring out how to pick the winners in that is probably the better way to think about it.
Hmm. Interesting. I think we're closing out on a perfect note here because listening to that tangled web of complexities of what you deal with at work every day, what's your superpower? How do you get through it?
I think, um, and I've been told this, it's bringing people together
Hmm.
who really care about what we're doing. Because at the end of the day, I wrote a blog on this probably 20 years ago on the Huffington Post. It was about inspired work.
Huh.
Um, inspired work is really, if you look at the companies that really succeed, the
Mm-hmm.
majority of them, there's always them. There is a strong inspiration that gets you through all of those downs,
Mm.
right? Because there's always hard times, there's always downs, there's always things that come against you, like, how the heck am I going to solve this problem? We'll find a way because it's inspired. People who are just doing it for the money, they're like, that's too much work. I'll walk away. And so they leave. But people who are really inspired to do it, they're going to get to that goal somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's how I would, you know, how I would think about it is it's the inspiration to move mountains that moves mountains.